In less than 1 hour, Kash Patel managed to do what no opponent had done in 3 decades: corner Nancy Pelosi so completely that her own lawyer abandoned her on live television. What began as a routine CNN ambush designed to destroy Trump's FBI director turned into the most devastating political exposure in modern American history. She walked into that studio with 30 years of political warfare behind her. The headlines were already written. The trap was already set. But she didn't know he had access to FBI financial records, NSA intercepts, and classified files on everything she had ever tried to hide. And just when it seemed she might recover, Patel revealed something about her family's fortune, something so explosive that the entire nation would never see her the same way again. Stay with us, because what you're about to witness is the moment a 30-year political empire came crashing down. Before we dive in, drop a comment and hit subscribe so you never miss a moment like this. CNN's Washington studio buzzed with anticipation. This wasn't supposed to be a fair fight. It was supposed to be a massacre. Nancy Pelosi had come here for one reason: to destroy Kash Patel on live television. The former speaker strode in like a conquering general. Designer suit, practiced smile, the confidence of someone who'd obliterated Republicans for 3 decades. This was supposed to be easy. Patel was new, controversial, clearly in over his head. Across the studio, Kash Patel sat quietly with a simple black briefcase. No entourage, no advisors, just the calm focus of someone who'd prosecuted actual terrorists and read classified intelligence that would terrify career politicians. The contrast was stark: Pelosi surrounded by staffers checking poll numbers, Patel alone with his files, looking like a man who'd already won a fight that hadn't started. Jake Tapper opened with diplomatic precision, but everyone knew what this was really about. Could the old guard destroy Trump's most controversial appointment before he damaged their system? We're joined now by FBI Director Kash Patel and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Tapper began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who knew he was about to witness something historic. Let's start with the fundamental question of FBI independence and reform. But Pelosi wasn't interested in diplomatic warming up. She'd come here to end this, and she wasted no time launching her attack. Her voice carried the full authority of someone who'd controlled Washington for longer than most Americans had been paying attention to politics. Jake, I think the American people deserve to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. She began, her eyes laser-focused on the camera before turning to face Patel with the cold calculation of a political assassin. Mr. Patel represents everything that's wrong with the weaponization of our justice system. He's a conspiracy theorist who's spent years promoting dangerous lies about our intelligence community. She paused for effect, letting the accusation hang in the air like smoke from a fired gun. You've written books full of enemies lists, she continued, her voice rising with practiced indignation. You've promoted QAnon theories. You've attacked the very FBI you now pretend to lead. The question isn't whether you're qualified for this position. It's whether you pose a direct threat to American democracy itself. The studio fell into the kind of silence that precedes either surrender or total war. Even by Washington's brutal standards, this was a devastating opening salvo. Pelosi had just called the FBI director a domestic terrorist on live television in front of millions of viewers. Political careers had been ended with far less. CNN's cameras captured every moment as they waited for Patel's response. Would he crumble under the pressure? Would he retreat into bureaucratic talking points? Would he prove that Pelosi's decades of experience had indeed overwhelmed Trump's controversial pick? For exactly 3 seconds, Kash Patel didn't move, didn't blink, didn't show even the slightest reaction to having been politically executed on national television. He just stared at Nancy Pelosi with the kind of ice-cold calm that only comes from someone who's interrogated actual enemies of America in windowless rooms where lives hung in the balance. That stare, every veteran watching immediately recognized it. It was the look of a warrior who'd just been fatally underestimated by someone who had no idea what they'd just unleashed. When Patel finally spoke, his voice was steady as steel, But everyone in the studio could hear something else beneath the surface, not anger, not defensiveness, but the quiet confidence of someone holding a royal flush in a poker game where his opponent had just gone all in with a pair of twos. Congresswoman Pelosi, he said, his words precise and measured, each syllable carrying the weight of constitutional authority. Since you want to discuss threats to American democracy on national television, he reached for his briefcase with the deliberate precision of a surgeon selecting the right scalpel. Let's talk about your relationship with foreign intelligence services. The effect was immediate and devastating. Pelosi's practiced political smile, the same smile that had launched 1,000 political careers and ended just as many, faltered for just a fraction of a second. But it was long enough for millions of viewers to see that this wasn't going according to her script. Long enough to realize that Kash Patel hadn't come to this fight unprepared. He withdrew a thick folder from his briefcase, each movement deliberate and theatrical. The folder bore FBI classification stamps that were clearly visible to the camera's official seals that made even the CNN production team lean forward in recognition of their authenticity. Patel held the folder up like a weapon, and the camera zoomed in to capture the label that would change everything. Pelosi Family Financial Intelligence, Classified. As FBI director, Patel continued, his voice taking on the methodical cadence of someone who'd delivered briefings in the highest levels of government. I have access to financial intelligence that reveals some very interesting patterns in your family's international business dealings, Congresswoman. Patterns that suggest systematic corruption spanning 2 decades. Jake Tapper was frantically looking at his producers, clearly realizing that his Sunday morning political show was about to become the site of the biggest intelligence disclosure in television history. This wasn't a political debate anymore. This was a federal law enforcement briefing happening on live TV. Nancy Pelosi's face had gone completely white. For 30 years, she'd been the one holding the classified information, the one with access to secrets that could destroy her enemies. She'd built her entire power structure on being the person who knew things that others didn't, who could weaponize information for political gain. Now she was sitting across from someone who had access to everything. Every bank transfer, every financial transaction, every communication that she'd thought was safely buried in the depths of government bureaucracy. And he was prepared to use it. "This is highly inappropriate," she stammered. Her commanding presence completely shattered her voice, lacking any of the authority that had made her one of the most feared politicians in Washington. "You can't just weaponize classified information on television." Patel's smile was deadly calm, the expression of someone who'd spent years learning how to remain composed while delivering devastating news to people who thought they were untouchable. "Actually, Congresswoman," he replied with the quiet authority of federal law enforcement, "exposing political corruption is exactly what the FBI is supposed to do. And I think the American people deserve to know the truth about who's really been compromised by foreign governments." The power dynamic in the studio had shifted completely. Nancy Pelosi, the woman who'd terrorized Washington for 3 decades, who'd ended careers with a single committee hearing, who'd controlled the flow of information and wielded congressional oversight like a medieval weapon, was suddenly the one on the defensive. And Kash Patel, the man they'd dismissed as an unqualified Trump loyalist, was just getting started. The hunt had begun, and Nancy Pelosi had just discovered she wasn't the hunter. Comment: trap set. If you see what's happening, the hunter just became the hunted, and Pelosi walked straight into the kill zone. This is just the beginning. Wait until you see what classified evidence Patel has on her family's $200 million fortune. Kash Patel spread the FBI financial intelligence documents across the CNN table like a poker player revealing a royal flush. Each page bore the distinctive seals of the Treasury Department Securities and Exchange Commission and FBI Financial Crimes Division, official markings that made even the seasoned CNN producers lean forward in recognition of their undeniable authenticity. The studio had transformed from a political talk show set into something resembling a federal courtroom, with Patel as the prosecutor and millions of Americans as the jury. Congresswoman Pelosi, Patel began his voice taking on the methodical precision of someone who'd spent years building cases against international criminals. You've been in Congress for over 30 years, earning a government salary of $174,000 annually. Yet somehow your family has accumulated a personal fortune exceeding $200 million. He paused, letting the numbers sink into the consciousness of everyone watching. As FBI director, I was curious about this mathematical impossibility. The studio fell dead silent. This wasn't political theater anymore. This was a federal law enforcement briefing happening on live television with classified financial intelligence being declassified in real time for the American people. Nancy Pelosi sat frozen, her practiced political composure beginning to crack as she realized the scope of federal surveillance that had been conducted on her family's financial activities. For the first time in decades, she was facing an opponent who had access to information that she couldn't spin, couldn't deflect, and couldn't make disappear with congressional privilege. Patel began laying out the evidence with prosecutorial precision, each document more damning than the last. Let's start with your husband's apparently miraculous investment abilities. He continued producing SEC analysis reports. Paul Pelosi achieved a 54% return on investment in 2024, more than double the S&P 500's performance. For context, Warren Buffett, widely considered the greatest investor in history, averages about 20% annually over his career. The irony in Patel's voice was devastating as he pulled out a calculator and began clicking buttons that echoed through the silent studio. The statistical probability of achieving Paul's success rate through legitimate market analysis is approximately 1 in 47 billion. To put that in perspective, Congresswoman, your husband is more likely to be struck by lightning while being attacked by a shark than to achieve these returns through legal trading. He fixed Pelosi with a stare that could melt steel. The only way to achieve this level of success is with advanced knowledge of government actions. What the FBI calls systematic insider trading, what the American people call corruption. Specific instances that painted a pattern so clear and devastating that even Pelosi's most loyal defenders would struggle to explain it away. March 15, 2022, he announced, displaying a timeline on the studio monitors. You attend a classified briefing about upcoming semiconductor legislation. The meeting ends at 2 p.m. At 2:47 p.m. that same day, Paul purchases $5 million in NVIDIA call options through his broker. The CHIPS Act passes with your enthusiastic support, providing billions in subsidies to companies like NVIDIA. Paul's options generate $4.1 million in profit in just 30 days. July 8, 2024, your House committee discusses upcoming DOJ antitrust actions against major corporations. July 9th, Paul sells $526,000 in Visa stock. 2 months later, the Department of Justice sues Visa for monopolization practices. Loss avoided approximately $200,000. February 12, 2024. You receive a classified briefing on national cybersecurity threats. February 13th, Paul purchases Palo Alto Networks call options worth $1.25 million. That same week, the White House announces a major cybersecurity initiative, profit $800,000. Each revelation was more damning than the last, but Patel wasn't finished with the financial evidence. He reached for another folder, this one containing what would become the smoking gun that no defense attorney could explain away. But statistical analysis isn't the only evidence we have, Congresswoman, he said, producing professional-grade audio equipment. We also have communications. The FBI surveillance audio was crystal clear, obviously recorded with professional federal law enforcement equipment. A voice identified as Paul Pelosi's broker could be heard giving specific trading instructions. Mrs. P says we need to move fast on the defense contractors. The Taiwan aid package is going to be much bigger than what's been publicly announced. How much bigger? Came an unidentified voice. Double what they're saying. and the Speaker says the vote is guaranteed to pass. She controls the committee schedule. The recording was devastating evidence of direct coordination between Nancy's congressional intelligence and Paul's trading activity, but Patel had saved the most damning revelation for last. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division has identified 127 separate instances over the past 5 years where Paul's trades correlated directly with your classified congressional briefings, he announced. This isn't coincidence, Congresswoman. This is the most systematic abuse of insider information in the history of Congress. For the first time in decades, Nancy Pelosi was completely speechless. Her hands gripped the edge of the table as she finally understood that her family's financial empire was built on documented federal crimes, all meticulously recorded by agencies she'd thought she could control through congressional oversight. This is illegal wiretapping. She finally managed to stammer, her voice lacking any of the authority that had made her one of Washington's most feared politicians. Actually, Patel replied with devastating calm, when American citizens are engaged in systematic securities fraud using classified government information, FBI surveillance is exactly what our counterintelligence operations are designed to detect. It's called law enforcement, Congresswoman. Patel's voice began to rise with the moral authority of someone who'd sworn the same oath to defend the Constitution that Pelosi had repeatedly violated. You swore an oath to serve the American people, not to enrich your family through classified information. While Americans struggled through inflation and economic uncertainty, you were using your position in Congress to generate millions in illegal profits. Every classified briefing became a business opportunity. Every committee hearing became insider trading intelligence. Every congressional vote became a guaranteed stock market bet. He leaned forward with the intensity of someone who'd lost friends to the kind of corruption that weakened America from within. The FBI has created a comprehensive timeline showing that your family treated the United States Congress like a personal ATM, withdrawing millions in illegal profits, while ordinary Americans trusted you to represent their interests. Nancy Pelosi sat motionless, finally understanding that decades of carefully hidden financial crimes had been systematically documented by federal law enforcement, and that the man across from her had the authority to declassify all of it. But financial corruption is just the beginning of this investigation, Patel said, reaching for another folder marked with even higher classification levels. Because while you were getting rich off classified information, our counterintelligence division discovered that you've also been working as a paid asset for foreign intelligence services. Smash that like button. If you think Pelosi got caught red-handed, comment guilty. If this looks like systematic criminal corruption. But wait until you see the smoking gun evidence about January 6th. Security failures coming next. The revelation about systematic insider trading had left Nancy Pelosi visibly shaken, but Kash Patel was just getting started. As FBI director, he had access to communications and intelligence reports that painted a picture of January 6th that the American people had never seen, and that Nancy Pelosi had spent 3 years trying to hide. Congresswoman Pelosi, Patel began, his voice taking on the gravity of someone about to expose one of the most serious security failures in American history. Let's discuss your role in the January 6th security breakdown. For 3 years, you've blamed everyone except the one person who actually controlled Capitol security that day, yourself. Patel gestured to the studio monitors, which began displaying previously hidden footage from the HBO documentary that Pelosi's own daughter had filmed. The clip showed Pelosi on January 6th saying the words that contradicted 3 years of public statements. I take full responsibility. Your own daughter's documentary captured you admitting responsibility for the security failures, Patel continued. Yet publicly you've spent years and nearly $20 million in taxpayer money blaming Donald Trump. Which version is the truth, Congresswoman? The juxtaposition was devastating. Pelosi's private admissions of responsibility versus her public campaign to blame others for what happened that day. As FBI director, I have access to communications and intelligence reports that reveal a very different story about January 6th than the one you've been selling to America, Patel announced, producing classified FBI analysis documents. Our investigation shows that the security failures weren't accidental, they were deliberate. He began displaying a detailed timeline that made the pattern of systematic security denials undeniable. December 28, 2020, Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund formally requests National Guard support for January 6th. Your House Sergeant at Arms, Paul Irving, who reports directly to you, denies the request. January 2nd, 2021, FBI intelligence assessment warns of potential violence at the Capitol. Chief Sund again requests National Guard deployment, again denied by Irving on your authority. January 4th, 2021, Metropolitan Police offer additional officers to help secure the Capitol. The offer is rejected by House leadership. January 5th, 2021, Chief Sund makes a final desperate request for enhanced security measures, denied. The timeline painted a picture of systematic rejection of security measures, but Patel had evidence that went far beyond mere incompetence. He produced FBI communications intercepts that revealed the real reason security had been deliberately weakened. This is a text exchange between your Chief of Staff and Sergeant at Arms Irving on January 5th. Patel announced, reading from classified FBI surveillance Chief of Staff, "The Speaker wants minimal visible security presence tomorrow. We need the contrast for optics." Irving, even if there's a genuine risk of violence, Chief of Staff, especially then, the more chaotic it looks, the more it damages Trump permanently. A few broken windows and some dramatic footage is exactly what we need. The text messages were damning, but Patel had even more devastating evidence. He produced professional FBI surveillance equipment and prepared to play audio that would change everything Americans thought they knew about January 6th. This is a recorded phone conversation between Paul Irving and an unidentified caller on the morning of January 6th, intercepted by FBI counterintelligence operations, Patel announced. The audio quality was professional intelligence-grade surveillance. Irving's voice was unmistakably clear as he discussed the Speaker's security instructions. "Irving, the Speaker is insisting we keep the National Guard completely out of sight. She wants any confrontation to look like federal law enforcement versus Trump supporters, not military versus civilians." Unknown voice. "But what if people actually get hurt?" Irving. "That's exactly the point. A few injuries, some broken windows, maximum dramatic footage for the evening news. Pelosi says it's the only way to end Trump's political career forever." The recording was absolutely devastating. It wasn't just evidence of security failures. It was proof that Nancy Pelosi had deliberately orchestrated the conditions for violence on January 6th for political gain. Patel's voice rose with the moral authority of someone who'd actually served in harm's way to protect American democracy. 13 people died as a result of January 6th, Congresswoman. Capitol police officers were injured. American democracy was damaged, all because you chose political theater over public safety. You didn't just fail to protect the Capitol, you deliberately weakened security to maximize chaos for political advantage. Nancy Pelosi tried desperately to respond, her voice cracking under the weight of documented evidence. These communications are taken completely out of context. You're weaponizing selective intelligence to attack a political opponent. The context, Patel replied with devastating finality, is that you sacrifice the safety of your colleagues, Capitol police officers, and American democracy itself for a few hours of dramatic television footage that you could use to destroy your political enemies. He leaned forward with the intensity of someone who'd spent years prosecuting threats to national security. As someone who prosecuted actual threats to American democracy, I can tell you that what you did represents one of the most serious violations of congressional responsibility in our nation's history. You used your constitutional authority over Capitol security not to protect our democratic institutions, but to create a crisis you could exploit for partisan political gain. The weight of evidence was overwhelming. Communications proving deliberate security, weakening audio recordings of political manipulation, and timeline analysis showing systematic preparation for violence, all documented by the FBI's most sophisticated surveillance capabilities. But Patel wasn't finished exposing the scope of Nancy Pelosi's betrayal of American democracy. January 6th wasn't an isolated incident of political manipulation, was it, Congresswoman? He said, reaching for another folder bearing the highest intelligence classification markings. Because our counterintelligence investigation has uncovered something even more serious, evidence that you've been working as a paid asset for Chinese intelligence services while serving as one of America's most powerful politicians. Drop A if you think Pelosi orchestrated the January 6th chaos for political gain. Comment political theater if you see the pattern of manipulation. But the next revelation about Chinese intelligence payments will absolutely blow your mind. The studio atmosphere had shifted from political theater to something approaching a spy thriller as Kash Patel opened files marked with the highest intelligence classification levels. What he was about to reveal would transform Nancy Pelosi from a corrupt politician into something far more dangerous, a foreign intelligence asset operating at the highest levels of American government. Congresswoman Pelosi. Patel began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent years investigating threats to national security. While you've been accusing others of foreign influence, FBI counterintelligence has been conducting a comprehensive investigation into your family's relationship with Chinese intelligence services. The folder he opened contained Treasury Department financial intelligence NSA communication intercepts and CIA operational assessments that painted a picture of systematic foreign penetration spanning nearly a decade. Between 2015 and 2024, the Pelosi family received over $80 million in payments that our financial intelligence analysts have traced directly to Chinese government entities, Patel announced, displaying Treasury Department documents on the studio monitors. These weren't investments from Chinese businesses, Congresswoman. These were intelligence operations disguised as legitimate financial transactions. The numbers were staggering, but the specificity made them undeniable. Bank of China subsidiary transfers to Paul Pelosi real estate investments, $23.4 million. Beijing Development Fund, payments to Pelosi Family Trust, $31.8 million. Guangzhou Investment Holdings purchases of Pelosi's San Francisco properties, $27.2 million. Nancy Pelosi's face had gone ashen as she realized that the intelligence community had been tracking every dollar, every transaction, every financial connection between her family and the Chinese government. But Patel wasn't finished with the financial evidence. He had something far more damaging, proof of the operational relationship between Pelosi and Chinese intelligence services. The payments weren't random, Congresswoman. He continued, producing CIA operational files. They were coordinated by Colonel Leeway Ministry of State Security, operating under academic cover at UC Berkeley's China Studies program. FBI surveillance has documented 47 separate meetings between Colonel Lee and your San Francisco office over the past 8 years. Every major China-related vote in Congress was preceded by these coordination meetings. The scope of foreign penetration was breathtaking, but the most damning evidence was yet to come. Patel prepared to play NSA counterintelligence recordings that would prove Nancy Pelosi had been actively working against American interests. This is Colonel Lee briefing his handlers in Beijing about his American asset intercepted by NSA surveillance operations. Patel announced preparing professional-grade audio equipment. The recording was chilling in its clarity. Lee's voice, speaking in Mandarin with English subtitles provided by intelligence analysts, discussed Pelosi's value to Chinese strategic interests. Lee's voice: the Congresswoman has been invaluable in delaying Taiwan military aid packages. Each delay cost Taiwan approximately 6 months of military preparation time. Beijing voice: what about the technology transfer restrictions that could damage our economic development? Lee: she ensures that committee hearings focus on trade disputes rather than national security concerns. American companies continue sharing sensitive technology with our partners. Beijing voice: excellent work. The payment will be processed through the San Francisco real estate channel as usual. The recording was devastating proof that Nancy Pelosi had been actively working to advance Chinese strategic interests while occupying one of the most powerful positions in American government. But Patel had documented evidence that went far beyond a single conversation. He began displaying a comprehensive analysis that showed the direct correlation between Chinese payments and congressional actions that benefited Beijing at America's expense. Every dollar your family received from Chinese intelligence services correlated with congressional actions that damaged American national security. Patel declared, his voice rising with moral authority. March 2019, $4.2 million payment to your family trusts. April 2019, you delay Taiwan Relations Act funding that would have provided critical military aid. September 2021, $6.8 million real estate transaction. October 2021, you weakened semiconductor export controls that were designed to prevent technology transfer to China. December 2023, $5.1 million investment in Paul's Ventures. January 2024, you block Hong Kong human rights legislation that would have imposed sanctions on Chinese officials. The pattern was undeniable. Chinese money flowing to the Pelosi family immediately before congressional actions that advanced Beijing's strategic interests. Patel's voice took on the weight of someone who'd actually fought America's enemies and understood the true cost of betrayal. Congresswoman, your Chinese handlers didn't just buy your votes, they bought American strategic advantage in the most important geopolitical competition of our time. Every delayed weapons shipment to Taiwan gave China more time to prepare for potential invasion. Every weakened technology restriction allowed China to steal American innovation that took decades to develop. Every blocked human rights measure emboldened Beijing's oppression of millions of people fighting for the same freedoms we take for granted. As a former national security prosecutor, Patel understood the legal implications of what he was revealing better than anyone in the room. This pattern of behavior meets the constitutional definition of providing aid and comfort to enemies of the United States, he declared. You weren't just taking Chinese money, Congresswoman. You were actively working to advance Chinese strategic interests against American national security. Nancy Pelosi attempted a desperate defense. This is completely fabricated. I've always been tough on China. My record speaks for itself. Does it? Patel replied, producing congressional voting records that destroyed her claim entirely. In the past 5 years, you've voted against China accountability measures 23 times. You've weakened Taiwan support legislation 8 times. You've blocked human rights sanctions on Chinese officials 12 times. Every single vote that benefited China came within weeks of payments to your family. That's not coincidence, Congresswoman. That's systematic treason. The evidence was overwhelming, but Patel had one final revelation that would place Pelosi's betrayal in its full international context. The CIA, NSA, and Defense Intelligence Agency have concluded in a joint assessment that Nancy Pelosi represents the most significant Chinese intelligence penetration of the U.S. Congress in American history, he announced. You've been Beijing's most valuable asset in Washington, and the damage to American national security is incalculable. Our closest allies have known about your Chinese connections for years. Taiwan intelligence services have been warning about your role in delaying military aid. Japanese intelligence identified you as compromised in 2021. Australian intelligence has been sharing information about your activities with our counterintelligence division. America's credibility in the Indo-Pacific has been severely damaged because our allies couldn't trust our own Speaker of the House. The weight of international intelligence assessments made clear that this wasn't just about American politics. This was about the security of the entire Democratic alliance against authoritarian expansion. But as devastating as the foreign intelligence revelations were, Patel had saved the most politically explosive evidence for last. Chinese influence operations were just one part of your systematic attack on American democracy, weren't they, Congresswoman? He said, reaching for another folder marked with Department of Justice seals. Because our investigation has uncovered how you interfered in the 2020 CETA presidential election through the most sophisticated information suppression operation in American history. Comment: Traitor. If you think Pelosi sold out America to China, share this immediately before a big tech censors it. But the next revelation about 2020 election interference will be the final nail in her political coffin. The Chinese intelligence revelations had left Nancy Pelosi looking like a cornered animal. But Kash Patel was about to deliver evidence that would transform her from a foreign asset into something even more dangerous to American democracy, someone who had actively interfered in a presidential election through systematic information suppression. Congresswoman Pelosi. Patel began his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years investigating election interference by foreign governments. Let's discuss how you applied those same techniques to interfere in the 2026 presidential election by suppressing truthful information about the Biden family. The folder he opened contained FBI communications analysis, Department of Justice investigations, and intelligence assessments that revealed the most sophisticated domestic election interference operation in American history. October 14, 2020, Patel announced, displaying a detailed timeline. The New York Post publishes the Hunter Biden laptop story containing credible evidence of potential corruption involving the Biden family. Within hours, you coordinated what can only be described as the most comprehensive information suppression operation ever conducted against American journalism. Patel began displaying phone records and email communications that showed the systematic nature of Pelosi's response. October 14, 4:30 p.m., your office contacts former CIA Director John Brennan to coordinate a response to the laptop story. October 14, 5:15 p.m., you personally call former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper. October 14, 6:45 p.m., you organize a conference call with multiple former intelligence officials to develop a unified strategy. October 19th. The letter is published, signed by 51 former intelligence officials, dismissing the laptop as Russian disinformation without any evidence to support that claim. The coordination was systematic and unprecedented, but Patel had evidence that went far beyond the intelligence officials' letter. He had proof of direct government pressure on private companies to suppress information during a presidential election. FBI analysis of communications between your office and major social media platforms reveals systematic coordination to censor truthful journalism. Patel announced producing Department of Justice documents. The evidence was damning in its specificity. Text from your chief of staff to Twitter executives. The speaker believes this laptop story represents a direct threat to American democracy. We expect immediate action to prevent its spread before it can influence the election. Facebook response. We'll reduce distribution by 95% immediately and flag all related content as misinformation. Always happy to support congressional leadership in protecting democratic institutions. YouTube confirmation. All videos discussing laptop contents will be removed for violating our misinformation policies. Consider the situation handled. Patel's voice rose with constitutional authority as he explained the implications of what Pelosi had orchestrated. Congresswoman, the First Amendment explicitly prohibits Congress from abridging freedom of speech or freedom of the press. But you found a workaround, didn't you? You couldn't legally censor American journalism, so you pressured private companies to do your censoring for you. This represents government-directed censorship of truthful information during a presidential election, exactly the kind of authoritarian behavior the Founding Fathers designed our constitutional system to prevent. But the constitutional violations were just the beginning. Patel had conducted analysis that showed the direct impact of Pelosi's censorship operation on the election outcome. FBI polling analysis conducted after the election shows that knowledge of the laptop story would have significantly affected voting patterns, Patel revealed. Post-election surveys indicated that 17% of Biden voters said they would have changed their vote if they had known about the laptop contents. In an election decided by 44,000 votes across 3 swing states, your information suppression operation potentially changed the outcome of the presidency. The implications were staggering. Nancy Pelosi may have single-handedly altered the course of American history through systematic censorship of truthful information. But Patel had saved the most devastating irony for the climax of this revelation. The supreme irony in all of this, Congresswoman, is that while you were claiming the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, you were actually spreading real Russian disinformation, he declared. The Steele dossier, which you promoted and cited for years as credible intelligence about Trump's Russia connections, has been confirmed by CIA assessment as Russian disinformation specifically designed to disrupt American elections and undermine confidence in our democratic processes. So you censored true American journalism while promoting actual Russian propaganda. You literally did Vladimir Putin's work for him while claiming to protect American democracy. The irony was so complete and devastating that even Democratic staffers in the studio looked uncomfortable as they processed the implications. Patel continued documenting the scope of Pelosi's information control operations. Your office maintained regular contact with every major social media platform, effectively turning them into censorship arms of the Democratic Party. Our analysis shows 573 documented requests for content removal over 4 years. 847 conservative accounts suspended at your direction, and over 1,200 posts removed for misinformation that later proved to be accurate. When Republicans tried to investigate the laptop contents in 2021, you used your speaker authority to block subpoenas, limit witness testimony, and prevent FBI cooperation with congressional oversight. You spent 2 years covering up what you had helped suppress during the election. Nancy Pelosi made one final attempt at defense. We were protecting American democracy from foreign interference and disinformation. Patel's response was swift and devastating. No, Congresswoman, you were the foreign interference. You used the power of the federal government to manipulate information flow during a presidential election. That's not protecting democracy, that's attacking the very foundation of democratic governance. This wasn't about Russian disinformation or protecting American institutions. This was about power, raw political power. You couldn't risk the American people learning the truth about your preferred candidate, so you used your government authority to silence them. That's not democracy, Congresswoman. That's authoritarianism with a California accent. The evidence of election interference was comprehensive and undeniable, but Patel had one final folder, the most devastating revelation that would tie together every aspect of Nancy Pelosi's systematic corruption over 3 decades. But election interference was just the most recent example of your long-term assault on American democratic institutions, wasn't it? He said, opening his final classified folder. Because our comprehensive investigation has revealed that you've been operating the real deep state conspiracy that you've spent years accusing others of running. Smash that subscribe button if you think Pelosi stole the 2020 Senate election through censorship, comment, election interference. If this proves systematic Democratic cheating, the final destruction revealing her as the real deep state mastermind is coming next. The studio had fallen into the kind of reverent silence usually reserved for churches or courtrooms as Kash Patel opened his final folder. This wasn't just another piece of evidence. This was a comprehensive FBI assessment that would expose Nancy Pelosi as the architect of the very deep state conspiracy she had spent years accusing others of operating. Congresswoman Pelosi, Patel began, his voice carrying the full weight of constitutional authority. For years you've warned Americans about threats to democracy and the dangers of authoritarianism. Today I'm going to show the American people who the real threat to our democratic institutions has been all along. The folder contained a comprehensive FBI analysis of systematic abuse of power spanning 3 decades, a pattern of behavior that revealed the most sophisticated political corruption operation in American history. While you were accusing Donald Trump of weaponizing government institutions, you were running the most comprehensive abuse of federal power in our nation's history, Patel declared. You didn't just break the law, Congresswoman. You turned every lever of government power into a weapon against your political opponents while enriching yourself and advancing foreign interests. Patel began systematically documenting how Pelosi had corrupted virtually every aspect of federal government operations. Let's start with the Internal Revenue Service, he announced, producing documents that would shock even seasoned political observers. Between 2010 and 2024, your office coordinated with IRS leadership to systematically target 247 conservative organizations for audits, harassment, and bureaucratic persecution. Tea Party groups, gun rights organizations, religious freedom advocates, conservative donors, all systematically targeted at your direction through coordination with political appointees in the IRS. Patel displayed an internal IRS memorandum from 2014 that provided smoking gun evidence. Speaker Pelosi's office has provided an updated priority audit list focusing on conservative political organizations and major Republican donors. Field offices should prioritize these cases for comprehensive review. Continued congressional appropriations for IRS operations depend on measurable results in these priority investigations. The memo was devastating proof that Nancy Pelosi had weaponized the tax collection agency against her political opponents while using congressional funding as leverage to ensure compliance. But the IRS was just the beginning, Patel continued. You also systematically corrupted Department of Justice prosecutions for partisan political gain. FBI analysis shows 17 documented instances of your office directly contacting DOJ officials about ongoing investigations of Democratic politicians, pressuring them to minimize charges or avoid prosecution entirely. You threatened budget cuts to force prosecutorial decisions 23 times over your tenure as Speaker. 8 career federal prosecutors resigned rather than bow to your political pressure, preferring to end their careers rather than participate in the corruption of American justice. The scope of DOJ interference was breathtaking, but Patel had evidence of even more serious constitutional violations involving the intelligence community. You turned congressional intelligence oversight into a partisan weapon, he declared. FBI counterintelligence has documented that you leaked classified information to media allies 31 times to damage Republican politicians, pressured CIA analysts to alter intelligence assessments for political purposes, and used your Intelligence Committee position to conduct surveillance operations against your political opponents. You transformed the agencies designed to protect America from foreign threats into domestic political weapons against American citizens who disagreed with your policies. But perhaps the most systematic abuse involved Pelosi's coordination with media organizations to control information flow to the American people. FBI communications analysis reveals that you operated a comprehensive media manipulation network, Patel announced. Daily 6 a.m. coordination calls with CNN, MSNBC, and major newspapers to distribute scripted talking points, promised exclusive access to journalists in exchange for narrative compliance, threatened congressional investigations of media companies that reported unfavorably on Democratic politicians. You didn't just influence the news, you controlled it through a systematic operation that would make authoritarian governments proud. The evidence showed that Nancy Pelosi had essentially operated a state-controlled media apparatus while serving as Speaker of the House. Your social media censorship operation was equally comprehensive, Patel continued. Over 4 years, you made one 847 request to remove conservative content from social media platforms, resulted in 573 conservative accounts being suspended at your direction, and coordinated the removal of over 1,200 posts for misinformation that later proved to be accurate. You turned big tech companies into censorship arms of the Democratic Party, systematically silencing American citizens whose only crime was political disagreement with your agenda. Patel's voice began to rise with the moral authority of someone who had sworn to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Congresswoman, you have systematically violated every principle that makes America exceptional. You weaponized the IRS against political opponents. You corrupted DOJ prosecutions for partisan gain. You abused intelligence oversight to spy on American citizens. You directed censorship of free speech. You interfered in presidential elections. You took millions from foreign governments while making policy decisions that affected those same governments. But perhaps most disgracefully, you did all of this while lecturing the American people about democracy, constitutional values, and the rule of law. Patel's personal story as the son of immigrants added devastating moral weight to his condemnation. My parents came to America believing this was a country where merit mattered more than connections, where public service meant sacrifice rather than enrichment, where the Constitution protected everyone equally regardless of their political beliefs. You have betrayed every single value that makes America worth defending. The moment had come for Patel to deliver the final blow that would end Nancy Pelosi's career and potentially send her to federal prison. As FBI director, I am announcing that Nancy Pelosi is now under federal investigation for the following crimes, he declared with the authority of federal law enforcement: conspiracy to commit securities fraud through systematic insider trading, violating the Foreign Agent Registration Act through undisclosed payments from Chinese intelligence services, election interference and voter suppression through systematic information censorship, abuse of office and corruption through weaponization of federal agencies, obstruction of justice through interference with federal investigations, conspiracy to deprive American citizens of their constitutional rights under color of law. The list of federal crimes was staggering in its scope and severity, but it accurately reflected the evidence that Patel had systematically presented over the past hour. Nancy Pelosi sat completely motionless, tears streaming down her face as 30 years of carefully constructed political power crumbled in real time on national television. There was no response she could give, no defense she could mount, no political spin that could overcome the mountain of documented evidence. For the first time in her political career, Nancy Pelosi had been held accountable by someone who had the authority, the evidence, and the courage to expose her systematic corruption. The Constitution still works when someone has the courage to enforce it. Patel concluded with quiet intensity that filled the entire studio. Today, the American people have seen that in our constitutional system, absolutely no one, not speakers, not former speakers, not anyone who betrays the sacred trust placed in them by the American people, is above the law. Congresswoman Pelosi, your career of corruption and betrayal is over. Your systematic abuse of power has been exposed to the world, and justice, real constitutional justice, is finally coming for those who thought their political power made them untouchable. The studio erupted in spontaneous applause as millions of Americans witnessed the kind of authentic accountability they had thought was impossible in modern politics. This wasn't just the end of Nancy Pelosi's career. It was proof that the American system of government could still protect the people when the right person had the knowledge, authority, and moral courage to enforce the Constitution. The warrior had completed his mission, the deep state had been exposed, and America had been reminded that truth, justice, and constitutional principles could still triumph over even the most sophisticated political corruption. Smash that like if justice was finally served. Comment, Constitution wins. If you believe no one is above the law, share this everywhere before the establishment tries to bury this historic moment. The 30 seconds of silence that followed Kash Patel's final words would be remembered as one of the most powerful moments in American political history. In that silence, everyone in the studio, and millions watching across the country, understood that they had just witnessed something unprecedented: the complete constitutional destruction of one of America's most powerful politicians by someone who actually understood what public service means. Nancy Pelosi sat motionless, staring at her hands, unable to formulate any response to the systematic documentation of 3 decades of corruption and constitutional violations. Her expensive legal team would later admit privately that no defense strategy could overcome the evidence Patel had presented. This wasn't a matter of legal technicalities or political spin, but documented facts and constitutional principles. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, the political earthquake began. The footage exploded across social media with unprecedented force that literally broke platform algorithms. Pelosi. Destroyed reached 2.5 million mentions in the first hour alone, the fastest trending political hashtag in internet history. Constitution. Wins hit 1.8 million mentions. No one above. Law reached 1.2 million. Deep state. Exposed trended globally as the world watched American justice being delivered in real time. The clips were impossible to ignore and impossible to dismiss. Pelosi's complete psychological breakdown as evidence mounted. The FBI financial documents proving systematic insider trading, the audio recordings of Chinese intelligence coordination, the communications showing January 6th security manipulation, And most powerfully, Kash Patel's moral authority as a combat veteran and federal prosecutor who had access to the classified files that proved everything. Conservative social media erupted in celebration, but surprisingly, millions of moderate and even liberal Americans began sharing the clips as well. This transcended partisan politics because it was about documented accountability delivered through constitutional principles rather than political theater. Cable news networks found themselves in an unprecedented situation. CNN had just broadcast the complete destruction of one of their most frequent and favored guests. The evidence Patel had presented was too well documented, too specific, and too overwhelming to dismiss as right-wing conspiracy theories or partisan attacks. MSNBC hosts looked visibly shaken as they tried to process what they had witnessed. Even the most liberal commentators struggled to defend systematic corruption that had been caught on FBI surveillance and documented by federal intelligence agencies. Fox News led every segment for the next month with comprehensive analysis of the Pelosi files, detailed examination of each piece of evidence Patel had presented with legal experts explaining the constitutional implications of each revelation. The Democratic Party went into complete meltdown mode as party officials realized that Pelosi's systematic corruption implicated dozens of other politicians who had participated in or covered up her activities over the years. Within 48 hours of the broadcast, 31 House Democrats announced they would not seek re-election. 8 Democratic senators called for comprehensive ethics reviews of their own financial dealings. House Democratic leadership voted to strip Pelosi of all remaining committee assignments. Progressive organizations began systematically distancing themselves from her three-decade legacy. The Republican Party, meanwhile, experienced something approaching vindication. For years, they had been dismissed as conspiracy theorists for suggesting that there was systematic abuse of power by Democratic leadership. Patel's methodical documentation proved that they had been right all along about the scope and severity of the corruption. Federal prosecutors armed with the evidence that Patel had declassified during the broadcast moved with unprecedented speed week 1. A federal grand jury was convened to consider securities fraud charges. Week 2, Foreign Agent Registration Act violations were formally filed. Week 3, asset forfeiture proceedings began to freeze the Pelosi family's $200+ million fortune. Week 4 election interference charges were prepared by DOJ's Public Integrity Section. The international reaction was equally profound. Allied intelligence services, which had been quietly documenting Pelosi's Chinese connections for years, finally felt free to share their assessments. British MI6 released a statement saying, "Confidence in American democratic institutions has been restored through this demonstration of constitutional accountability." Israeli Mossad confirmed that they had been aware of concerning patterns in Pelosi's policy positions regarding Taiwan and had adjusted their intelligence sharing accordingly. Australian intelligence services announced a comprehensive review of information sharing protocols now that the security concerns had been addressed. The Chinese Communist Party, meanwhile, went into full damage control mode. Emergency recalls of identified intelligence officers' desperate attempts to destroy evidence of the operation and internal investigations into how their most valuable American asset had been so completely exposed. Under Patel's leadership, the FBI underwent immediate and comprehensive institutional reform. New counterintelligence protocols specifically designed to monitor congressional corruption, enhanced whistleblower protections for agents reporting political interference, regular declassified briefings to ensure public transparency about threats to democratic institutions, restored public trust in federal law enforcement. Reaching its highest levels in decades, Kash Patel himself became an overnight political phenomenon. Approval ratings that defied conventional political wisdom. 91% among Republicans, 67% among independents, and an unprecedented 28% among Democrats for a Trump appointee. Patel for president movements erupted across the country, but he remained steadfastly focused on his FBI mission rather than political ambition, saying only that the Constitution doesn't need politicians, it needs public servants. 6 months after the broadcast that changed American politics forever, Nancy Pelosi was convicted on all federal charges. Securities fraud, 15 years in federal prison. Foreign agent violations, 10 years concurrent. Election interference, 8 years concurrent. Obstruction of justice, 5 years concurrent, total sentence. 15 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, plus $250 million in fines and restitution to the American taxpayers. The woman who had terrorized Washington for 3 decades spent her remaining years in federal custody, a forgotten symbol of the corruption that the American system had finally found the courage to reject. But the most lasting impact was cultural. The contrast between Kash Patel's authentic public service and Nancy Pelosi's systematic corruption had created a new standard for American leadership. Military recruitment surged as young Americans saw that heroes still existed in government. Intelligence agencies began attracting the best candidates in decades as Patel's reforms restored honor to national service. Congressional approval ratings increased for the first time in 20 years as Americans regained faith that corruption could be exposed and punished. 1 year later, as Director Patel testified before Congress about ongoing investigations into political corruption networks, his final words captured what had been accomplished. "We proved that the Constitution still works when someone has the courage to defend it. We showed that authentic Americans committed to public service can still triumph over systematic corruption and foreign influence. Most importantly, we kept faith with every American who believes this country is worth defending." The son of immigrants had reminded America what authentic public service looks like. The Constitution had proven it could still protect the people when the right person had the knowledge, authority, and moral courage to enforce it. And most importantly, the American people had witnessed that when authentic heroes face systematic corruption, when constitutional principles meet political theater, when documented evidence confronts decades of lies, truth, justice, and the American way still prevail. Hit that notification bell, because when real patriots stand up to corruption, freedom wins. This is what happens when authentic constitutional defenders face the deep state. God bless America, God bless the Constitution, and God bless everyone who still believes this republic is worth saving.